They don't just kill you in Hollywood, they erase you. That chilling quote has haunted the industry for decades, echoing through dressing rooms and empty studios. But what really happens when a star falls from favor in the land of fame and reinvention? Who gets cast out and why? Tonight, we trace the real stories behind Hollywood's exiles and uncover the hidden truths that the studios never wanted whispered beyond the velvet curtain. Fatty Arbuckle. In the 1910s, Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was a comedic king, the highest-paid actor in Hollywood, a box office juggernaut who seemed untouchable. His talent for physical comedy launched dozens of hit shorts and features, and the studios raced to outbid each other for his next project. But Hollywood's love affair with Arbuckle imploded almost overnight, swept away in a storm of scandal that would change both his life and the film industry forever. In 1921, Arbuckle's world collapsed when he was accused of raping and inadvertently killing actress Virginia Rappe at a wild party in San Francisco. Sensational headlines screamed guilt before a trial even began. Studios and theaters pulled his films. Tabloid writers, eager to feed a public hungry for scandal, painted Arbuckle as the face of Hollywood decadence, an easy target in an era obsessed with morality. 3 trials followed, and in the end, Arbuckle was fully acquitted. Jurors even issued a rare apology, blaming the press and the studios for destroying an innocent man. But the damage was irreparable. Arbuckle's name became a byword for disgrace. The studios, frightened of public backlash and new industry decency codes, made him a pariah. His fortune drained away in legal fees and failed comebacks. He directed under pseudonyms and took bit parts, but the golden doors of Hollywood never reopened. Arbuckle died in 1933, just as he was beginning to find work again, a tragic symbol of how swiftly the industry could turn on its own, and how one accusation, however unfounded, could erase a legend overnight. Ingrid Bergman. Ingrid Bergman's face once adorned every marquee from Stockholm to Hollywood, her beauty, talent, and grace captivating audiences and critics alike. But behind the angelic image was a woman willing to risk everything for love and artistry, even if it meant inciting the fury of an entire country. Bergman's exile from Hollywood wasn't due to drugs or criminal charges, but a scandal that exposed the industry's hypocrisy and America's puritanical streak. At the height of her stardom, Bergman left her husband and daughter for Italian director Roberto Rossellini, with whom she began a passionate affair while filming Stromboli. The news ignited a national firestorm. Bergman, pregnant and unrepentant, became the target of condemnation from pulpits and politicians. She was even denounced on the floor of the U.S. Senate as a powerful influence for evil. Hollywood slammed its doors. Studios canceled her contracts, theaters boycotted her films, and the press cast her as a homewrecker and traitor. For years, Bergman lived in artistic exile in Europe, unable to find work in the land that once worshipped her. But exile sharpened her craft. She collaborated with Rossellini on a string of Italian neo-realist classics, pushing her talent into new, raw territory. Eventually, Hollywood's moral outrage faded, and she was welcomed back, winning an Oscar for Anastasia in 1956. But the wounds remained. Bergman's journey from revered star to outcast and back again revealed just how fickle and unforgiving Hollywood's embrace could be. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's story is the blueprint for Hollywood tragedy, a prodigy whose voice could shatter hearts and whose smile masked a relentless, grinding pain. Groomed for stardom as a child, Garland grew up in the harsh spotlight of MGM, where studio executives fed her pills to keep her thin, energetic, and compliant. By her early 20s, Garland was already an icon, but also a prisoner to addiction and anxiety, her life spiraling beneath the Technicolor surface. As her behavior grew more erratic, missed rehearsals, hospitalizations, public meltdowns, the same studios that had exploited her youth turned their backs. By the late 1940s, Garland was seen as unreliable, and she was quietly blacklisted by the industry machine that once hailed her as its brightest star. Her contracts were canceled, and her financial troubles mounted. Offers dried up, except for risky, short-lived comebacks that always ended in disappointment. Garland's exile wasn't official, but it was brutally effective. She was forced to take nightclub gigs and vaudeville tours just to survive. Her prodigious talent wasted on smoky rooms instead of the big screen. even when she staged triumphant returns, like her legendary A Star is Born performance. The Academy passed her over for awards, as if the industry couldn't quite forgive her for falling apart. Garland died in 1969, only 47, a casualty of a system that discards the broken and buries the inconvenient. Her legacy is immortal, but her years as an outcast remain a chilling reminder of how Hollywood devours its own. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin didn't just help invent the language of cinema, he embodied the spirit of silent comedy, his little tramp character beloved across continents. But for all his genius, Chaplin's refusal to play by Hollywood's rules and his outspokenness on political and social issues made him an easy target as post-war paranoia swept the nation. In the 1940s and 50s, America turned on Chaplin. His left-leaning politics and advocacy for causes like workers' rights and pacifism brought suspicion in the McCarthy era. Add to that his scandalous personal life, affairs with much younger women, a notorious paternity suit, and a string of marriages, and Chaplin became the perfect villain for a Hollywood desperate to appear patriotic. In 1952, while traveling to London for a film premiere, Chaplin was informed by the U.S. authorities that his re-entry permit had been revoked. Just like that, the world's greatest movie star was barred from the country that had made him rich. Chaplin spent his remaining years in Switzerland, a creative exile making films for European audiences. Hollywood tried to whitewash his contributions, erasing him from history books and keeping his films out of circulation. Only decades later was he invited back to accept an honorary Oscar, a gesture as bittersweet as it was belated. Chaplin's exile was a warning. In Hollywood, even genius isn't enough to protect you from the shifting winds of politics and public opinion. Joan Barry. Joan Barry's Hollywood story reads more like a cautionary fable than a career arc. In the early 1940s, Barry was a striking young actress poised for fame, someone the studios saw as moldable and magnetic. But her trajectory veered sharply off course after a brief and ill-fated affair with Charlie Chaplin. When the relationship soured, Barry didn't fade quietly into the background. She launched a very public paternity suit against one of the most powerful men in the industry. It was explosive. Blood tests reportedly excluded Chaplin as the father, but thanks to a loophole in California law, the court ruled against him anyway. The case turned Barry into a tabloid fixture, but not the kind that opens doors. Hollywood didn't see a bold woman standing up to a powerful man. It saw a liability. Barry had crossed an unspoken line. Studios blacklisted her without ever saying it out loud, and the fallout from the trial pushed her into a spiral. Her mental health unraveled in full view of the public. She broke into Chaplin's home and was later institutionalized. By then, she was unemployed, deemed unstable, scandalous, and too risky for any role. Her name, once whispered with hope in casting rooms, became a warning. To challenge the industry's kings, even when they were wrong, was career suicide. By the time she reached her 30s, Barry had vanished from the screen entirely. She lived the rest of her life in near poverty, her promising beginnings completely eclipsed by a single decision to stand her ground. Her story remains one of the darkest examples of how the machinery of Golden Age Hollywood could destroy a woman for stepping out of line, proof that in that era fame came with a leash, and the moment you tugged too hard, it tightened until you disappeared. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer was never the typical Hollywood starlet. She was intelligent, fiercely independent, and unafraid to challenge authority, traits that initially made her stand out in a studio system obsessed with obedience. Farmer's performances in films like Come and Get It and Rhythm on the Range were lauded by critics, but her refusal to play by Hollywood's rules quickly made her a liability in the eyes of studio executives. She openly criticized the industry, rejected starlet roles, and fought back against typecasting, all while battling rumors about her fiery temper and emotional instability. Farmer's defiance led to fewer roles and mounting studio frustration. The press began to paint her as unhinged, amplifying every outburst and incident until her reputation was beyond repair. By the early 1940s, Farmer was arrested for drunken driving and assault, and what followed was a nightmarish spiral into institutionalization. She spent years in and out of psychiatric hospitals, where she was reportedly subjected to brutal treatments, including shock therapy and, by some accounts, a lobotomy, though the latter remains debated by historians. Hollywood quickly washed its hands of Frances Farmer. Studios refused to cast her. Former friends distanced themselves, and the industry used her fate as a warning to other women who dared to rebel. Though she eventually returned to the stage and television, Farmer never regained her former glory. Her life became a cautionary tale about what happens when a star refuses to conform, a brutal reminder that in classic Hollywood, rebellion came at a staggering cost. John Gilbert. John Gilbert was once called the great lover of the silent screen, a heartthrob whose romantic roles opposite Greta Garbo made him a household name. But Gilbert's fate would prove to be one of Hollywood's cruelest reversals. As talkies swept in, rumors spread that Gilbert's voice was ill-suited for sound, a myth perpetuated by studio politics more than reality. In truth, Gilbert's voice was perfectly fine, but his combative relationship with MGM head Louis B. Mayer proved disastrous. Mayer, reportedly angered by Gilbert's insubordination and off-screen antics, actively undermined his transition to sound, assigning him to poorly written scripts and sabotaging his publicity. Gilbert's image suffered as a result. The press mocked his dialogue and attributed every box office disappointment to his supposed vocal inadequacy. Struggling with professional rejection and personal demons, Gilbert turned to alcohol. His health and career spiraled downward, roles became scarce, and the public's fascination quickly faded. By the early 1930s, the matinee idol was little more than a faded memory, a tragic casualty of studio politics and the relentless pace of technological change. Despite brief attempts at a comeback, Gilbert's reputation never recovered. He died at just 38, heartbroken and nearly penniless. Gilbert's downfall serves as a bitter illustration of how swiftly Hollywood can discard even its brightest stars, and how personal vendettas and industry shifts can destroy a legend's legacy almost overnight. Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton was more than just a comedian. He was an architect of cinema. His silent films didn't just provoke laughter, they shaped the language of visual storytelling. With a blank stare and boundless physical daring, Keaton turned the absurd into art, orchestrating stunts that defied logic and gravity. His classics like The General and Sherlock Jr. weren't just hits, they were cinematic revolutions. But in a tragic twist worthy of his own scripts, Keaton's downfall wasn't caused by scandal or failure. It came from surrendering control. In 1928, Keaton signed with MGM, seduced by promises of financial security and industry clout. It was a decision he would later call the worst of his life. MGM stripped him of his autonomy, assigning him to writers and directors who didn't understand his voice. The precision and soul that defined his independent work were replaced with assembly line gags and watered-down scripts. His body remained in the frame, but his spirit, the sharp wit, the daring stunts, the controlled chaos, was gone. Unable to create on his own terms, Keaton began to unravel. He turned to alcohol, and his drinking became as legendary as his pratfalls, except there were no laughs this time. He was fired from MGM, went through a public divorce, and spiraled into obscurity. By the early 1930s, the man once hailed as a silent-era genius was appearing in low-grade shorts and gag roles, barely recognizable to a new generation of filmgoers. Hollywood didn't just forget Buster Keaton, it rejected him. Only late in his life did critics and a few directors begin to celebrate his work again, hailing him as a pioneer. But by then, the damage had been done. For years, he wandered outside the spotlight he helped invent. Keaton's story isn't just one of artistic exile, it's a grim reminder that Hollywood doesn't always destroy its rebels through scandal. Sometimes, it breaks them quietly by handing them contracts that seem like rewards and end up as cages. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's fall from grace is one of the most haunting stories in Hollywood lore, a brutal reminder that in Tinseltown, fame can vanish faster than it arrives. With striking blonde beauty and magnetic screen presence, Payton seemed destined for stardom. She held her own alongside screen legends like James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye and was quickly branded the next big thing. but the very industry that celebrated her image was quick to condemn the woman behind it. Her personal life soon eclipsed her professional promise. While engaged to Franchot Tone, a respected actor from the MGM stable, Payton fell into a volatile affair with the unpredictable and jealous Tom Neal. The love triangle ended in a public scandal when Neal violently assaulted Tone, nearly killing him. The story was splashed across every newspaper, the elegant, photogenic blonde at the center of a Hollywood bloodbath. Suddenly, Payton wasn't a starlet anymore. She was a scandal. The studios, once eager to build her into a marquee name, ran for cover. Her contracts were canceled, directors stopped calling, the leading roles dried up overnight. As the offers faded, so did the money. Desperate to survive, Payton took B-movie roles, then low-budget horror, and finally, heartbreakingly, turned to prostitution on Sunset Boulevard. Her face, once gracing movie posters and magazine covers, now appeared in police reports and tabloids documenting her public drunkenness and arrests. Addiction took its final toll. Her health deteriorated rapidly, and her once glamorous looks became unrecognizable. She died in 1967, at only 39 years old, broke and alone in a seedy Los Angeles apartment. The transformation was staggering. Hollywood's promise to make her a queen of the silver screen had turned into a curse. Barbara Payton's story isn't just about self-destruction. It's about what happens when an industry that thrives on image refuses to forgive imperfection. In the end, she was another woman the machine had no use for once the spotlight dimmed, Lupe Veles. Lupe Veles was a force of nature, loud, funny, passionate, and unapologetically herself. Dubbed the Mexican Spitfire, she wasn't just a nickname, she was a phenomenon. In an era when Hollywood preferred its women demure and silent, Veles barreled through the studio gates with raw talent and unstoppable energy. She broke barriers as one of the first Latina actresses to become a mainstream star in American cinema, starring in comedies and dramas that capitalized on her fiery screen presence. But behind the screen, Veles refused to play the obedient starlet. She spoke her mind, loved whom she pleased, and refused to shrink herself for anyone. That defiance made her dangerous in a town built on control. The press feasted on her personal life, her love affairs, her fights, her emotional outbursts, until the headlines drowned out the performances. Hollywood, always eager to mold women into marketable packages, couldn't handle Veles's unfiltered spirit. They labeled her difficult, unstable, too much. And then, just like that, the roles vanished. The same fire that had made her a star was now used as the excuse to shut her out. In the final years of her life, Veles found herself pushed to the margins. Studios no longer called. Tabloids mocked instead of celebrated her. Isolated and humiliated, she died in 1944 under circumstances the studio machine spun into legend, but even in death, she wasn't granted dignity. Her passing became a punchline for Hollywood's cruelty, her legacy reduced to gossip rather than art. Veles didn't become an outcast because she lacked talent. She became one because she refused to shrink. Her story isn't just about one woman's downfall, it's about an industry that couldn't bear to see a woman of color stand tall, loud, and proud. In the end, Veles's exile wasn't a failure of character, it was a failure of Hollywood. Mabel Normand. Mabel Normand was a trailblazer of the silent era, director, writer, and comedian whose natural charm and comic timing helped launch the careers of legends like Charlie Chaplin and Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. For a brief moment, she was one of Hollywood's most beloved stars, a rare woman with creative power both in front of and behind the camera. But Normand's name would become inextricably linked to two of the era's most sensational scandals, both of which turned her from a beloved figure to Hollywood outcast. First, Normand was implicated in the 1922 murder of director William Desmond Taylor, whose body was discovered in his Los Angeles bungalow. Mabel, a close friend and the last known person to see him alive, was hounded by police and the press. Though cleared of wrongdoing, the constant scrutiny damaged her reputation. The following year, Normand's chauffeur shot and wounded millionaire Cortland S. Dines with her own pistol, another headline-grabbing scandal that left her further tainted in the public's eye. Normand's battles with addiction and declining health made matters worse. As the scandals piled up, studios distanced themselves, fearing negative publicity. Roles vanished, friends drifted away, and Mabel was left to watch as her pioneering legacy was erased by the very machine she helped create. She died of tuberculosis in 1930 at just 37, her final years spent in relative obscurity. A tragic end for a woman who helped build Hollywood, only to be exiled by its appetite for scandal. Peg Antwistle. Peg Antwistle's career never soared to the heights she dreamed of, but her story became one of the most haunting cautionary tales in Hollywood history. Trained on the Broadway stage, Antwistle moved to Los Angeles in the early 1930s with hopes of movie stardom. She landed a role in the RKO picture 13 Women, but the part was slashed in editing, leaving her prospects dim. As rejections piled up, Antwistle's despair grew, a struggle familiar to many who come to Hollywood seeking fame. On September 16, 1932, Antwistle climbed Mount Lee and threw herself off the H in the Hollywoodland sign, leaving behind a note that read, "I am afraid I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this long ago, it would have saved a lot of pain." The press seized on the tragedy, painting her as a casualty of Tinseltown's cruel indifference. Studios offered posthumous sympathy, but when she needed support most, the industry had left her to fade into obscurity. Antwistle's death turned her into a ghostly symbol of Hollywood's dark side, a place that devours hope and leaves the vulnerable behind. Her story endures as a reminder that the pursuit of fame can be as destructive as it is seductive, and that the city of dreams has always harbored its share of forgotten souls. Llaya Lee. Llaya Lee was once Hollywood's golden girl, a silent era darling, whose charm, sweetness, and photogenic innocence won over audiences and studios alike. Dubbed America's sweetheart, she rose to fame in the 1920s alongside legends like Rudolph Valentino, exuding the fresh-faced appeal that studios adored. As the industry transitioned into sound, Lee adapted gracefully, becoming one of the few silent stars who held her footing during the shift. But Hollywood's affections are fickle, and Lee's story would soon take a far darker turn. By the 1930s, her life behind the scenes had become increasingly chaotic. A string of troubled relationships, including a messy and highly publicized divorce, began to chip away at her once spotless image. Lee struggled with alcoholism, a silent but steady force that made her unreliable and erratic on set. But the most devastating blow to her career came in 1935, when she was linked to the mysterious and violent death of vaudeville performer Ray Raymond. Though Lee wasn't directly involved in the murder, her ex-husband, Western actor and director Jack Holland, was the accused. The scandal tainted her name. The studios didn't care about nuance. Her association with such a sordid case was enough to brand her as toxic. The offers dried up overnight. Leading roles became background parts, and then nothing. By the 1940s, Llaya Lee was invisible. No more headlines, no more premieres. She lived out the rest of her life quietly, relying on Social Security and fading memories of her once dazzling career. When she died in 1973, few in the industry took notice. Llaya Lee's downfall wasn't about talent lost. It was about a reputation tainted in a town that trafficked in illusions. Hollywood loved her when she was wholesome and compliant. But when life turned messy, they turned their backs. Her story is a forgotten echo of the countless women who went from beloved to banished the moment their real lives refused to stay silent. Gene Tierney. Gene Tierney was Hollywood perfection incarnate, flawless features, elegant restraint, and a screen presence that was both icy and hypnotic. In films like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven, she wasn't just a star, she was an enigma, someone audiences couldn't look away from. But behind that ethereal beauty was a woman silently unraveling. Her story wasn't one of scandal or disgrace. It was something quieter and far more devastating, a tragedy that Hollywood didn't know how or simply refused to handle. In 1943, during a wartime appearance at the Hollywood Canteen, Tierney was unknowingly exposed to rubella by an adoring fan who had broken quarantine to meet her. The result was catastrophic. Her newborn daughter, Daria, was born blind, deaf, and with severe developmental disabilities. The guilt crushed Tierney. Her grief, though private at first, began to seep into her work. She grew distant, erratic, and overwhelmed, her once meticulous performances marred by emotional exhaustion. Hollywood responded not with empathy, but with distance. Studios, always wary of unpredictability, labeled her unstable. Whispers about her mental health circulated through casting offices. The same industry that had once lit her in soft focus now left her in the shadows. Tierney entered psychiatric institutions for treatment, including electroshock therapy, which left her traumatized and disoriented. Her attempts to return to film were met with cool indifference. The star who once commanded attention now fought for bit parts and guest roles. Despite moments of resurgence, the damage was done. Tierney would later write candidly about her suffering in her memoir, Self-Portrait, but Hollywood never fully embraced her again. She was, in their eyes, a liability, a beautiful woman whose pain had made her difficult to market. Jean Tierney didn't vanish because of bad choices or a headline-making scandal. She vanished because Hollywood had no use for broken hearts and fragile minds. Her story is a quiet indictment of an industry that prized perfection, even at the cost of compassion, and had no script for what to do when its stars began to fall apart. Hollywood's grace wasn't a scandal. It was a slow, cold exile. In the early 1930s, she was Warner Brothers' top female star, a fashion icon draped in satin and pearls, known for her smoky voice and quietly commanding presence. Or a scandal. It came with silence, the kind that descends when an industry decides you're no longer useful. And in that silence, we hear a truth that defined the golden age. Even queens can be exiled, without warning and without a crown. Beneath the glimmer and applause, Hollywood's golden age was as ruthless as it was glamorous. Behind every shining star were stories of exile, heartbreak, and silence. These outcasts weren't just victims of scandal. They were reminders of how quickly loyalty, adoration, and opportunity could vanish. The same machine that built their legends could erase them with a single scandal or rumor. As the credits roll, we're left to wonder, whose legacy survives and whose name will vanish into the shadows of Hollywood's history?